It's a great pleasure to meet you here, Sebastian, today. I know you as a sensitive filmmaker and integral artist, and the topic of today's conversation will be the film Grace and Grit, which you filmed and which was released in 2021. Recently, thanks to you, I had the great pleasure of seeing this movie for the first time in Austria. It was a great, deep experience for me. Thank you for that. And so, yeah, we start with our conversation. And we are here today because we share a deep fascination, the books and writings of Ken Wilber. His integral perspective on life has the power, in my view, to change everything if we truly engage with it. And the book Grace and Grit touched me deeply, and it was my entry to the Ken Wilber universe. So the opening question would be how would you introduce this story to someone who has never heard of Ken Wilber and is unfamiliar with Grace and Grit?
Ramon, first of all, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I respect and appreciate your work in the way that, I think, just to preface a little bit about work and sort of vocation and what that is, and it's really a calling, an invocation, if you will, how we are going to spend our lives. And then in that Joseph Campbell-esque way, it's wonderful if we can facilitate making a living, being able to do that. But the most important thing is that we find service, I think, to the world, and to ourselves, to our own becoming, our own self-actualization. And so I appreciate your work and your interview with Ken and that care. And so that dovetails into my own work and my own care and my own call of service in the way that anybody who starts reading Ken Wilber is not just looking to have a good time and read something passive. Yeah, they're looking really to touch the edges of consciousness, if you will. And if somebody is interested in consciousness, no matter who they're reading, yeah, whether it's Nagarjuna or contemporary writers, whether it's psychology or Jung or transcendent philosophy, Vedanta, etc. Eventually, if someone is interested in consciousness, it leads to the writings of Ken Wilber. So I think in that way, yeah, my introduction to it would be that I fell in love, like you, with Ken Wilber's mind and read most of his books and was just blown away and in that way transformed. That I found that he was saying things and writing things that perhaps I intuited, that we all intuited somewhere within, but they're so complex and big and robust and visionary that it's hard to put words to those things, that it requires the dexterity of a voice that is brilliant and visionary and poetic and graceful, that's both rational and transrational, beyond rationale. And so I think Ken Wilber, that's really his forte, to be able to use language and bend it in a way to touch what's otherwise intangible. So for me, I fell in love with, like you did with the book, and it rocked me. And in short, when I put the book down, Ramon, I was bawling my eyes out because I was devastated. And yet at the same time, I was totally uplifted.
Mm.
And so I had to really think about, why was I devastated and why was I uplifted? And what were these two opposing currents? And those opposing currents were, and the reason why I wanted to make a movie, which was that the little me here and now in this world was devastated because the little me here now wants to go on and have another meal and see another sunrise and sunset. And in other words, in this story, keep the love alive. The little me like wants the man and the woman, the couple to be together, right? I don't want that to end because love is so sweet. And so that part of me was devastated. And the part of me that was uplifted is the part that is the ascendant I, as Ramana Maharshi terms the I, or the I behind me. In other words, the absolute me, the big S in spirit, God, that dynamic or aspect of me that is indelible, that lives beyond, that is not concerned with my own birth or death or or becoming again. And that part of me, the God, the transcendent me, was thrilled. Why? Was so overjoyed because that aspect, that component of me that sees through the little me, was able to touch a love that is so deep and so resurrecting, and so then, therefore, in the process, so crucifying, that it got to know love from both sides, if you will, from the place of this life and the place of the other. And so it was in that spirit that I wanted to make the movie. For people who don't read Ken Wilber's work, it's a love story, um, but it's really a story about five stages of love that I've identified, and it's really a story about transcendent love, about sort of love beyond life. And the idea in the film is to carry the viewer experientially through those stages, ultimately into this absolute or transcendent love or love beyond life.
Thank you for this broad opening. And
Uh,
there's already a lot of it in it. And yeah, I would definitely confirm this journey you also brought me in by watching this movie and watching it again and the third time, and it goes deeper and deeper, and it comes so much through of your intention also by translating this book, this deeply moving book into a movie. It was amazing for me to see the sensitivity and authenticity also. Yeah. What personally fascinated you so much about the story that you felt the need to bring it to the screen?
yeah, I think, first that juxtaposition between the sort of devastation and elation, that I found that paradox to be intrinsic to our experience in life, right? When we greet the other, whether it's the sibling or the parent or the child or the lover, we're excited, and yet we're sad when we have to see that person get on an airplane and we're not going to see them for a year or a long time or at their passing. And so, in the Khalil Gibran sort of quintessential way, that sadness is indicative of the joy that we once felt, right? In the way that Chongyam Trungpa writes, this energy, it's just an energy, and we're identifying it as sadness. And really, that sadness is a celebration of all the joy that we felt. And so I felt that the book, that story really articulated that so deeply. Yeah, Ken's story and Ken and Treya's story articulated that in their journals. And for those of you, people who aren't familiar with the book, it chronicles her journals and his journals during that period in the 80s in Northern California and then in Germany and then in Lake Tahoe. And and I think that so that was one aspect that I had not seen or experienced a love story that was that intense, articulated in film. There were many that were incredible, I must say, and I watched two love stories a night for a month. So that was 60 love stories when I was kind of figuring out when I was adapting the screenplay from the book. And there were some that stuck out. Rust and Bone, the Jacques Audiard film, stuck out. Titanic, obviously, for a lot of reasons that Titanic is a movie that's not about the sinking of a ship. The ship is always sinking. But it's really about these two individuals confronting their mortality. And so they throw the rules of society out the window. The relationship wouldn't work in normal society, but because they're both going to die, because the ship is going down, they decide to love each other and they overcome the limits of their own selves to love each other. It's only for a brief period while the ship is sinking, but that period is eternal. It's forever, right? And so that's why everyone loves that movie, right? In the end of Titanic, when it's like, never let go, Jack, never let go. And I love this use of language because never let go means, well, okay, they're going to be, he's going to be dead in a second. But never means hold this moment forever. Never let go of the moment. In other words, let go of yourself, in my translation of that, and enter eternity, right?
Hmm.
Um, Kind of forever exit every other moment so that we can enter this one, right? And then the idea is that that percolates outward, right? Again and again on a moment to moment basis. And then secondarily, the call to make the film is really that, and Beaches was another one, the Bette Midler film, and Philadelphia, the Denzel film, gorgeous. A lot of these films that kind of speak to sort of transcendent love on some level. But really, also, I had never seen a death scene that I thought was really. I mean, all those scenes are spectacular. All those movies hold spectacular passing scenes. I've held someone when they die and been in the room or on the beach when people have passed away, right? And most of us have now. And it's a really epic, beautiful experience. And it's a transcendent experience if we open ourselves to it. And I just felt that I hadn't seen that articulated in movies really to the way that was powerful and poetic and raw and real. And I really wanted to do that. And I felt that the book and Ken's writing and Treya's journals took me there. And I wanted to offer that service and on the screen.
Here you're talking about this in that way is like it was very easy to production or finishing such a project. So what about your inner processes? What was the biggest challenge in translating such an intimate and profound subject into a movie, and what gave you the courage and confidence to take on this challenging topic in the entire production?
I think it's a very interesting question because I had read most of Ken's books and then we met and I went to see him and we were simpatico and kind of hit it off and sat eye to eye for many hours while people were sitting taking notes on the meeting, etc., as they will do when you go meet Ken Wilber. And and at that time, other producers had the rights to Grace and Grit and wanted to make it, and many other producers had come before me to make that film. And I had asked him why he thought it didn't get made, and he thought that a lot of those interpretations were great, but they were for the most part love stories. They were for the most part just heartbreaking love stories. And I had this idea that while that was a big part of it, it was really about articulating also Ken Wilber's fingerprint in terms of transcendence and what is transcendent love. And so I think he trusted me right off in that way. So in terms of the toughest part, I just think I surrendered right at the beginning because I am, and have been in such awe of his mind and his writing and so deeply grateful for that, that I reimagined my own life and the world and what language and love and being and eternity is through Ken Wilber's mind. And I was so humbled and grateful for that, that I thought the least I can do is tell this story and his story and their story and the story of all of us in terms of love, that that's the greatest service I can do. So I think I arrived at that, and then and then at that point, I no longer mattered. That it was like, okay, if this kills me, it kills me. Like I'm giving this duty to somebody, to the singular being who's influenced me on such a profound level, and I must do it. It's simple. The letter's been sent. I must go now. And so along the way, yeah, there were a lot of challenges. I mean, no doubt. I almost went into production 3 times, and for huge sums, 10 million plus, and the wrong actor or actress or the wrong production team or the wrong, and my duty to the creativity and to the writing, and as a steward also, to the collaborators who helped me make this movie, um, you know, figuring out those challenges and what choices, to make in terms of how to collaborate with who and when required shutting my eyes and feeling. So those were challenging, but ultimately when I was still enough to be able to say, okay, no, I must do this. This is the way. This is the way. This is in that Joseph Campbell way. This is the path through the dark forest. I got to follow that one. So those are the challenges, but they were, I suppose, easy to overcome because I had surrendered to it, and it was just a matter of like, yeah, this almost killed me, like emotionally, intellectually, financially, etc. But whatever. Like, what else are we gonna do? Like,
It didn't. It
what?
didn't.
That's right, it didn't.
Yeah.
And perhaps I intuited that. Um, and um, and what's worth the price of the candle, right? In that Alan Watts-esque way. Like, that's fine. The candle's going to burn anyways. I might as well burn it doing something, wasting time, so to speak, doing something I love. And this was something that I loved, and a person who I love, being Ken, and a writing and a mind that I'm in awe of and love. So that was, I think, the challenges. What was the second part of that question?
What gave you the courage of and the confidence, yeah, to take it through then, yeah.
The courage comes from my love for something bigger than myself. Yeah. So to be in service, right? And I think about that, analogously, and this comes up in my office sometimes in sort of, psychology and couples therapy, that it's like you have these men often, depicted in movies when they're going to battle, right? And they're on the side and they're like, oh my God, I don't want to go to battle. Like and they're facing the enemy the opposing army on the other side of the battlefield, and they're nervous, and you got to go to the bathroom, and you think, God, I just want to be at home with my wife, and like, why are we going to battle, right? Like, and then it's time to go, like charge, and then they go. And the only way they can charge across the field with the axe or the sword is to surrender fully and say, well, I might die, but I have to go. I can't halfway go. And you see them go, and it's depicted oftentimes, right, in movies like in Braveheart, et cetera, or in all these sort of epics. Once I make the decision to go, it's like, I'm afraid. And then all of a sudden, and I go, right? That by surrender, right? That's how we swallow. That's how we digest. That's how we dance. That's how we orgasm. That's how we sign our name. That's how we go into battle. That's how we sign up for love because love will hurt us. And when I mean that, I mean devotion to anything, an individual, a vocation, et cetera. And so the courage comes from surrendering to something greater than ourselves. And when we fully surrender, that transition happens that we no longer care about our own safety. We no longer care about life or death, that now we're in service to God, if you will. And so I think that's beautifully depicted when we see men in battle, running into battle where they're afraid, and then all of a sudden it's and they just go because they're saying in their actions, this is absurd, life is absurd, but I'm giving myself up to something bigger.
Mm.
And dying is a potential consequence of that, and that's okay. And I felt that way about making this movie.
That reminds me on the quote of Werner Herzog by Fitzcarraldo when he was asked how when Jason Robards and Mick Jagger and they fell out and the production was half they had to interrupt and how he can continue the production and he said then this famous quote, I live my life or I end my life with this project. This kind of devotion and pure surrender to something, as you said, greater than
Absolutely. It's
ourselves.
beautiful. And that's really the only way to do it, anything, right? I think there's this German phrase, I'm not sure if I have it right, my pronunciation's probably awful, but nur die Harden kommen in the Garden, right?
Ah, nur die Harten kommen in den Garten, ja.
Yes. Right? That it's like, okay,
Garden
you
of
have,
Eden, the Garden of Eden.
yes, that you only get there by surrender, by discipline, by giving all, something like this, yes?
Yeah, yeah. This is a very interesting aspect also for the inner process and then what can we develop out of this? Um, how do you personally distinguish between a true calling of the soul and the voice of the ego?
That's such a wonderful question. And there is a relationship, right, between them. And I think that in pop psychology, we hear these terms like, starve the ego, feed the soul, this kind of thing, which is like from, on the pedestrian level, fine. It draws somebody into something, saying like, all right, stop identifying with self and start identifying with something bigger. But then on a deeper level, right, it's nonsense. Like the ego doesn't exist. It's a paradigm, right, that we use in psychology. Like it's, what is it? I mean, I think that's the first step into answering the question. Well, it's the sense of who am I? Like, what do I look like? What do I wear? What do I like? Who am I involved with? What do I do with my time? And where do we hold that sense of awareness? We kind of hold it here somewhere, through the visual field, how we see the world. Like, who am I? What am I doing? This is what I'm experiencing, in my life. And the surrender then, to this to the soul is to say, okay, the ego is very powerful, very important because it I mean, if somebody's interested, let's say in this case, to personalize a guru or a teacher, whether it's Carl Jung or Mahatma Gandhi or Socrates or Plato or Aristotle or Ken Wilber, the ego is an important component of that because the ego is identifying with something, saying, "Well, that's beautiful. I want to be more like that in this world, right?" And I think, what drew me to go meet Ken Wilber? Well, part of it is that I want my own becoming. But who's the my own that's doing the becoming, right? It's my ego has a sense of self, and it's the one that wants to transcend and go upward. And so that's the one that gets me on the plane and flies there and reads the books and sits opposite Ken Wilber to be able to do that. So I think that that's a very important part of it, that I think gets in that term, the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater, that people have this kind of pop generalization about, well, the ego's bad. No, the ego's amazing. It's so important, right? What's important though is not to confuse the ego with identity, yeah, and with the true self, right? That the ego's a vehicle for the soul, and it must be in service to the soul, right? That then it becomes healthy, and it has to constantly be broken and rebuilt and broken and rebuilt and broken and rebuilt, right? And that, that becoming allows, I think, the service of the soul, you know.
So this would be one of the major aspects of a true healing, which goes beyond the physical healing, which is a true healing in our consciousness and reconnection to the true self. But it's a complete another different level really to engage in something. And then there is a complete other kind of energy which flows through you and then offers another kind of real true healing, which is beyond our mind and our concepts.
I really appreciate you saying that, and that's beautifully expressed, what you said, another kind of healing. And I think that's so important. I mean, that's so profound, right? On the most fundamental level of what is the manifest realm of life. In other words, the physical realm. In other words, our physical existence on a molecular level, right? Yeah, and you said healing on another level, and I think that that really ties into that. That now with technology, there's so many people online, these sort of podcasters who are new age, saying, "Well, like, do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't touch all these things." That's fine, right? But if we're not listening to our soul, and we're not heeding something that is deeply in line with our own becoming, our own self-actualization, it doesn't matter if we do all those things. We're going to be sick as hell, right? It doesn't matter if we follow all the things not to eat and do not to touch and all those things. We must, as you're saying here, be in line with some purpose, some true north, some omega point pole to evolve. And then if we're in line with that, whoa, the body starts to regenerate because the cells are saying there's something so important. Then at that point, it doesn't matter what toxins are coming in. It doesn't matter if I'm not sleeping enough. It
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
matter if I'm ill. Like you see it, you see rock stars, like
yeah.
Keith Richards and the Rolling Stones, tons of drugs and sickness. Like this guy should be dead. And then he's got to show up on stage and they're 12 hours in a row, they're just rocking and rolling. And you see it, people are limping and they can't work and then they need to go to battle or they need to do something. And you need to rescue the child or the lover or something like that. And so I really appreciate, what you're saying because I think that is, for me, my interest in psychology. Yeah, and I have an office in Santa Monica for integral therapy, cognitive therapy, and couples therapy because my interest is ongoing in sort of what is that? Let's touch the deepest component and aspect of ourselves to be able to heal on the most profound,
Hmm.
godly level, and that means being in line with our own becoming. Because
Is this alignment with the formless consciousness until
yes,
physical
yes,
center of our being? Yeah, and
yes.
yeah, it's also it's a very gracious experience to get in touch with that and really yeah feel it and the cells can breath and take part of it and our whole being is lifting up. Yeah.
Indeed. And I know with your work and your workshops and working with others, in the way that you express it, and I think that's our, part of our, our being simpatico is that I have, for instance, even this afternoon, I have a couple coming to see me and the healing that I feel in my own cells when I'm supporting them is that also because then I feel I'm in service to something else, something greater, when I feel their healing, I can feel it literally in my own body. Like when they leave and they're uplifted, I feel like, whoa, I am doing something that is glorious. What is that? Does it matter if they live or die or stay together, don't stay together? Not so much. But what matters is our own becoming in line with, and this is the transcendent goal, this sort of tie your wagon to a star MO, which is in the name of grace, in the name of beauty. Like we don't have much choice in life, but the choice is, okay, procure and see and realize and actualize beauty around us.
Mm.
Great in a way that's not forceful, but that's graceful. And I think that's the truest, most fundamental thing that we can do. When in doubt, do that, right? And then that's a great guide. That's the guide that I use.
So, what insights does Grace and Grit, the topic of Grace and Grit, the book, the movie, offer about the connection between spirituality and this kind of true healing? And in what ways can illness or other life-shaking events guide us towards the highest self?
Yeah, what a great question. You know, there's a line I put in the movie where Treya's in a shower and played by Mina Suvari brilliantly. And she's thinking back about, she's like shaved her head and she's sitting in the shower and she's thinking about it just an instant ago. She was sitting in that same shower with her husband, and then it flashes back and forth to her and Ken Wilber, played by brilliantly by Stuart Townsend. And they're sitting there and they're giggling and they're laughing and they're in their robes in the exact same seated position, except in this case, he's not there. She's there alone and she's crying. And the end of the relationship and the end of her life. It doesn't get any worse, you know? And she says, she's crying, she says, and I kind of it's barely audible, but she says, you got to let go to hold on. You got to let go to hold on. And it's something that Ken says to her earlier. And this is very important for me. I don't know if it's in his book or in her journals, but it's a, my expression of that, you got to let go to hold on, right? And that's the truest sense of this sort of Buddhist tenet of nirvana or of non-attachment, right? In other words, if we hold on to the breath, we don't get another one. And the only way to accept the breath in is to let it out. That's
Mm.
it. What a paradox, right? Right? What a paradox. The only way to allow the sunrise is to allow the sunset. The only way to receive the lover is to let the lover go.
Mm.
The only way to be reborn is to allow death. And in that Buddhist sense, right, the term nirvana, like, you know, almost literally is to blow out, right? To let go, to surrender to. And so this, I put that in there, you've got to let go to hold on. And I think that this book we're in 400 pages, we're in an hour and 45 minutes, yeah, in the movie. It articulates that. Wow, we ultimately, no matter what we do, no matter how much we love our sibling, our child, our lover, our mother, our father, our friend, our vocation, our life, we must let go. We must let go. And then in the letting go, whoa, we get to thrive in it.
I think this was also part of your filming process, this letting go all the time, every time again. And so this is a story that lives from its authenticity. And how did you manage to create this authenticity on the set?
Thank you for that, this like really, pragmatic question. It starts with now that we've talked about trusting and having faith in the process and surrendering to that on a philosophical level, just in a very actual level. Originally, when I was writing it, when I was adapting it from the book, I watched so many movies to help me get the rhythm, right? And I know Ken Wilber, I know his mind, I know his person. And so he was very easy for me to write as a character because I can feel it, right? I can feel what he would say, what he wouldn't say, it's like right there for me. And Treya, only from her journals and the book and some pictures and talking with Ken and other people. I went to visit, Linda Conger, who shot the cover photo of the book. I went to go visit her in Santa Barbara and talk with her and talk with some other people, etc. So for her, I was watching a number of other actresses play roles and thinking about what works, what doesn't work, and where's Treya in here, you know? And then I met Mina Suvari, and we were on another movie that I was working on as an actor, actually, and I played her psychologist in the movie, and I was opposite with her, and she wasn't on my mind to play Treya, but then when we were sitting there, she was so emotionally available, and she had this power of emotion and silence and presence. And I was looking, and she looks a little bit like Treya, and she's vegan, and Treya was vegan, and she'd just been married in a similar place and way that here in Canada got married. And I was thinking to myself, wow, out of nowhere, like, is this the girl? And then I went to the producer of the film, who ended up being my, producing partner on Grace of Grid, and I said, how is it with Mina? Because I want to make sure there's no like problems, like alcohol problems, or the person's reliable. I'll say she's outstanding, like she's great, 10 out of 10. So then we sent the script to her manager, and he said, she's got to play this. Like, this is she's born for this. And then she felt the same way. And then she and I met. And then on the first meeting, she cried like 3 times in the meeting talking about it because it was so deeply meaningful for her. And so I knew right away, that's the girl, no question. She's the one. And now that that we've made the movie, I couldn't imagine partnering around that role with her, with any other person in the world. Like, that's hers. And so, the question was, how do I create this environment on set, right? That's true and on track. Because she's the lead, that's the first most important, part. And then, Stuart was just so brilliant. And he and I connected. And originally I didn't see it because he had long hair, like down to here. He had like 5 years of hair, right? And he shaved his head on the first day of filming to play. And then when he shaved his head, everybody was blown away. They're like, "Oh my God, he looks exactly like Ken Wilber, the lip and the ears and the eyebrows and the two of them together." It was gorgeous. To answer the question, Treya was archetypally, Mina was archetypally Treya, like inside.
Mm.
So it's work for her as an actress, an enormous amount of work because it's an enormous amount of dialogue for both of them. And Stuart was archetypally like Ken. Like this guy who's masculine and stoic, but so tender and alive inside. Yeah, Stuart. And they both had this well of emotion that they could tap into at that moment in their life. So that when we shot the film, that was there. So that's the most important, one of the most important components, this robust availability for both of these actors, and they had unbelievable chemistry. And so then this is the three of us telling the story, and then the other actors were, extraordinary. Frances Fisher and Rebecca Graff and Mariel Hemingway and Nick Stahl. And then certainly my DP, Shan Liljestrand, just extraordinary. And he and I have done 4 or 5 projects together. So we got a shorthand, a sort of telepathic kind of communication where we're setting up a shot and he kind of knows what I want. And I know, and he's, we've got a wonderful rapport. And that's very important. And you see directors work with DPs, directors of photography, again and again, because it's such an intimate relationship. And he and I spent an enormous amount of time together driving around, looking at locations. And he was a super, he was just invaluable there, because he had lived in some of these locations. So like what really looks like Tahoe, what really looks like Northern California, the trees, the discussing the homes and the shots and then the lenses and all those things. Yeah, and then the producing partners to have total trust and faith in the project. So I think to be able to create the environment on set requires a smooth working machine. Yeah, and a movie is an enormous um, living expression of something. And there are always things pushing it in these different directions, which is why you see big, gigantic movies and you get in the theater and you think, well, this movie's horrible. How could this movie be so horrible? It's $10 million dollars or $50 million dollars
Yeah.
or $100 million dollars, and it's like unwatchable because it goes off track sometimes and it falls apart
Yeah,
because
it's
one
empty
act
within, or so sometimes it feels empty within.
sometimes, yeah, the originating the originating voice is empty, or an actor pulls it off, or a producer of something, falls apart. And it's easy for the ship, you have a couple people on board and it destroys the whole thing. So I think in this case, everyone was committed, and I was deeply grateful to be able to collaborate with such brilliant artists in every department on this movie. And so that's how it stayed on course right to the end.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this story portrays love on many levels. How do you define love in this larger sense?
Wow, that's a great question. How many hours do we have? I think of, and I think it has to be answered for the first time every time it's asked, because it's not about the answer, because it's not here, right? It exists here, and then we exist inside of it, being love. And so it must be re-articulated. The question is more important than the answer, right? Because the question gets us driving towards a deeper question, which is what's really going on, not what's happening, but what's really going on. Like, what am I? Who am I? What is existing here? What is the power of the cosmos? What lights up the sun and the stars, and what lights up my lover, and what lights up my excitement for the day or for a moment to do something, right? And this is a deeper question, right? And that is really like, what is love? And I think about that in the sense of at the Big Bang, or however many Big Bangs, right, you want to look at, but let's say just this Big Bang, in the sort of manifest realm of God, that you have kind of, quarks and protons and neutrons and electrons, and they're floating around in infinite space. And it's like impossible they're going to get in touch with each other. But they do, and they come together, right? And all these, subatomic particles come together and they form atoms. Like, that's amazing. Like, that's a miracle. Like, come on, that's nonsense. And then it happens again. All these atoms are floating in like infinite space. Like, literally just picture the Big Bang. And then it's just like all these atoms come together and they form molecules, right? And then, as a Ken Wilber reader, right, it's like, and then it's cells, and then and then the sort of proliferation of the manifest world, of the gross world, of physical life. And that is, in the way Ken Wilber describes Eros, right? And that's love. That's this force that draws us together, to collaborate when two somethings come together and make another something, right? Whether it's a child or a vocation or a film or a discussion like we're having now, that is really the ultimate, deepest instinct of love. It's to communicate and play, right? And it is the dance. So, and the reason why it can't be defined is because it doesn't have a finality, right? If we look at what's the purpose of a song, it's not to get to the end, because if it was, it would just be like bum 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 bum, and that's it, right? But it's not. It's bum 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 bum, and it goes on, right? And we love that, and then we want to hear it again and again and again and again, always throughout our life. Yeah, and it's the same thing with the breath. What's the purpose, right? Is it the breathing in or the letting go? Like, which one feels better? And I would ask anyone listening, like, to try to figure that out, right? Like right now, you taking a deep breath and you're like, that's pretty good. That's pretty good too. Which one's better? I don't know. It can't be answered, right? Because there is no finality. There is no finality. There's only beginning again, right? And so love is that. Love is the surrender to beginning again. And if that means with another lover, or with the same lover, with my eyes seeing the lover again for the first time, that is my duty. And that is my diligence, is to my own capacity to see again for the first time. And so I think that's love.
So, if you had to choose one aspect of this story that has profoundly shaped you and your life, what would it be?
Wow, that's beautiful. I'll answer in a couple ways. One as a person and one as a filmmaker. I mean, as a person, just in some way, just being here with you right now, I think like the proliferation of this sort of artifacts that are manifest in this world, derivative of that adventure. And so then the venture is carried on. So if two people are watching it tonight, because of this, wow, they're carrying the torch,
Mm.
like the stars through the night sky. And here you and I are, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you. And I think that's really derivative of these things. And I'm so humbled and grateful, like for that, very much so, Ramon. And then I think as a filmmaker in very, sort of specific sense, um, in the movie there are a few sequences. One is where Treya rips up the kitchen and she's just had a bad sort of prognosis from the doctor, and Ken doesn't tell her, and they're riding home and he's keeping it quiet, but she can see it on his face. And so then we cut to she's furious because of facing a hard reality. And I only did one take of that. We only did one take of that, and she's crying and screaming and yelling, and then they end up hugging and crying. And it's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful. They're Mina and Stu are so beautiful, and I love the scene. It's beautiful. And then there's another scene where, people who watch the movie, she never sees him cry, right? And he cries 3 times. Yeah, and it's alone in the bar in Germany, and then it's another time when they're in the hospital and he walks away alone. And that scene, it's a oneer. He's in the hospital with her in the room, and everyone's in there, and he's like, "I'll be right back, babe." And he walks down the hall, and then you can see it wear on his face. And then he goes to find a room alone in the dark and sit, and he has to be alone to be with himself, and he like is just distraught. And that's directly from Ken Wilber's journals and directly from the book. And I think that's a really, really beautiful scene because it's showing these sort of masks that we put on in the world, not to protect ourselves so much as to help others. And that in that case, he's doing that here for her, and I think it's so beautiful. And then, of course, in the end, he cries after she passes, so she doesn't get to see it, but he feels it with her. She feels it, from beyond, if you will. And that scene, the two of them, after I shot that scene, everyone on set was crying. I have one producing partner, and he's like never shows any emotion, And Lucas and I looked at him when we were shooting the scene, and he was like looking at the camera like this, and I could see he was crying. It was fantastic. And um, and I didn't cut. I just let it roll out. And then I walked in the room. I'm looking at the monitor, and I walk in the room. And I just laid on the bed, and the three of us just like held each other. It was so beautiful collaboration between myself and Stuart and Mina, and that's really, really beautiful scene.
Thank you for that. That leads me to yeah. I also want to share one sequence which was very impressive for me, and also the masks you mentioned before. So at the end of the film, there is a scene that deeply moved me. The mask scene, and
Yeah.
this is accompanied by the words, "Moreover, much as you may wander, you must return ultimately to the self. So why not abiding the self here and now? Grace is there all along." And this is such a mysterious scene, and without dissolving the mystery of this scene completely, could you share something about it and what does it mean to you to continuously surrender to the self in the here and now?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for that. First off, they're wearing these Venetian masks, right, of life and death, and so they're sort of celebrating that. And I love the juxtaposition of, um, when we were talking about that scene, and I wanted these. They're celebrating and they're happy and they're playing, but she's dying, and they're wearing these masks, of death. And it's sort of like saying, well, who's doing the celebrating here? Is it you and me, or is it us up here in the stars? Is it the face of the stars? And so that's the crux of that. And so then the underlying voiceover there of him reading. Uh, is from No Boundary, from Ken Wilber's No Boundary, and it's taken from the Ramana Maharshi um, expression, right? Of as far as you may wander, you must always return to the self. So why not abide in the self here and now? And Ken would spell that self with a big S, meaning not the little me here now, but you must always come back to the place of origin, which is the place of God, the place of just suchness, just non-duality, the place of beyond. And so if you must always go there, why not live from there here and now, right? Because if we live from there here and now, no one can put a knife in us, right? We are then in that way indelible, like it is okay, and then all of a sudden, and this is the truest warrior Zen sense. You want to take my life, okay? Uh, Joke's on you. Like it's okay, you cannot take anything from me. And I think in the Viktor Frankl way, right? That's he's implying that, right? When he writes Man's Search for Meaning, that freedom exists between stimulus and response, right? And that there's this space that I can determine the little me here and now. What am I feeling? And if I reside in the ultimate, right, in the absolute me, the self, I do not need to be threatened, by anything. Like love is here, grace is here. Grace was there all along, like it's pretty spectacular what's happening if my perspective is cosmocentric, is from the view of God, if you will. When we were going in and we were like looking at there were some notes. We're like, all right, do you really need that scene? Like, people were like, what's going on here? These masks, and can we cut that? And I said, no, no, we must. That stays in. That's got to stay in. That's for me so important. And so
I'm really grateful for that because it's
Thank
about it's 40 seconds or so, and it's so yeah, so deep, and I watched it over and over again, and it's beyond time. It's not
thank you.
the
Yeah,
scene.
that's the whole movie right there. That's it, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's the movie in 40 seconds. Absolutely.
This is also for me very interesting what by watching the film that I felt that it can be experienced on two levels. So the idea is you can see it as yeah, it's very sad in the end, and she is dying, and you have the personal love story, and what is the whole movie about? It has no happy end. Yeah.
Yeah.
So after the you can see it from this perspective. After the movie, I'm depressed, and I'm hoping. And so she why is she why is no healing in her body, and so you could be very yeah, one perspective. Yeah, yeah.
The question being like, what is it? Like, what is then the purpose? Like, what is then the resolve, right? Ultimately, yeah. Okay, all my work is, I suppose, like Ken Wilber's work, or, and even like Carl Jung, or even like Joseph Campbell, or, it's challenging. Like, my work is in psychology, my work as a speaker, my work as a storyteller here, you and I now, my work in that movie, my work in my next two movies coming. I have a series online that's available everywhere around the world right now. It's called The Eight Questions. It's on streaming on YouTube. And it's questions about God, love, purpose, heaven, hell, religion, spirituality. You can watch it anywhere in the world. There's 51 episodes. Ken Wilber's in one of the episodes. And so I think um, for me, I feel an affinity with being able to describe the intangible, and being able to describe sort of the eternal moment, and being able to coax individuals, audiences into that space, whether totally aware or just subtly feeling poetically. And I feel that's my skill set. So I have to be true to that. Yeah. And so in this movie, I'm doing that in a period of an hour and 45 minutes, because the book did that for me in 400 pages. And Ken does that so well in so much of his work. And so the idea is to coax the reader into this place of like, it's gonna be okay. It doesn't matter how much I hurt. That's my mission, right? In psychology as a storyteller, and I tend to be very funny. I tend to be poetic. I somewhat intellectual, I suppose, but it's really the idea is to draw out this space within that is indelible. that cannot die. And so I want people to be, if anything, in touch with that because I seek to be in touch with that because it makes life so much more beautiful. And so in this case, now specifically to relate that to the movie, yeah, it's heartbreaking. Then in the credits, right, you'll see the real people next to the actors, and then Ken has a voiceover, and then we have VHS, old footage of Treya, real footage of her that's identical to the footage we shot with Mina, like identical. And there's this sort of sense of hope. And we have the theme song then by Stuart Davis and the music by Kim and Catherine Kluge, the musicians who scored the movie with me. And there is an uplift because even the individual is heartbroken, the self, the transcendent self inside is uplifted. Like, wow, it's okay. Like, and I'll put a pin in that, by saying once we're okay with being heartbroken, right? That's such an important decision. Once we're okay that love is going to hurt, then we can work it out. The danger is really in pop psychology, which is why I go against all the podcasters, almost all of them today. It's like, how do you make it, like the first decision in a love relationship is like, this is going to hurt. Am I okay with that? Really, am I really okay with that? Yes, I'm okay with that. Okay. Now all of a sudden it gets a lot better, right? Versus, I don't want to hurt. I don't want it to be bad. I want it to all be good. This is devastating. The relationship's not going to go well. Same thing with let's say, a mother and the child or the father and the daughter is a great relationship. Like, you think your wife's breaking your heart. Wait till you have a daughter. Like, I don't have kids yet, but the daughter is going to say something to the father at some point that is going to devastate him. And she's going to use language that's so hard, or say something so heartbreaking. And what will he be able to do? His love for her is so great that he will just tolerate it. He won't say anything. Oh my God, I'm getting crucified here, right? So why not practice with the wife? Why not practice with the lover? That other relationship. In other words, that becomes transcendent love, right? To be able to touch this space deep within. And I'll finish with that by saying, in that sense, I think woven into the movie. And at that time, right, in the 80s, Ken was reading Adida, and I read a lot of Adida because of Ken. I got, introduced to him, the Don Horst principle, and et cetera. And also then as a boy, Khalil Gibran, is brilliant, one of the most brilliant poets ever. And both of them are saying this statement: if love has not crucified you, then you do not know love, right? And for me, in my work as a storyteller, as a speaker, and someone in psychology, in series or in movies, it is to say, I am here to offer a pathway for your own self, for your own becoming, for resurrection. The requisite to that is crucifixion. So if you'll let me take you through a path of crucifixion, I can point towards resurrection. And I smile because it's a joyous journey. It's brutal, but it's so empowering. And so that's the joy in the film,
Mm.
that is so empowering, right? We don't get resurrection without crucifixion. And if we have the courage to go there because we love God, spirit through the other, then we will continually be resurrected.
And that's so great about the story and this movie to get in this realm of experience to have the greatest, the deepest sadness and greatest joy in the same moment.
Ramon, I want to thank you so much for your care for the film, and I'm so grateful that we connected. And hopefully, the movie will be out in the German market soon, largely because of you. I know that if people are watching in the US, it's on Amazon. It streams on Amazon and Apple. In most places internationally, it's on Netflix. I think it's premiering in London on Netflix soon, next month. And then until then, if people want to see the my series, The Eight Questions, that's on YouTube, and then obviously on my website. And if anyone wants to engage with me on Instagram, it's just my name with the digit one at the end. And so I'm so grateful. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you too. It was a great pleasure for me, and I look forward for everything we'll come next with this movie also, and hope we can see it soon in the German language countries too. Yeah.
Yes. And I look forward to seeing you when I come. You know, I have a book that was published by Geiger Verlag in Zurich, and it's in German. And it's a hard read, and I'm going to re-edit it for the English audience. But it's called The Consciousness Revolution as well. It's on my site as well.
I have it here. I have the German
Okay.
version of, yeah. I read
Oh,
it,
wow. Great.
I think 3 or 4 years ago. Of my introduction to into your universe. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you
And
for
it
inviting
was great because I saw it, I think, in Denver by the Loft, at the Loft event from Ken Wilber, yeah, in 2004.
Ah, very good. Very
And I thought,
good.
who is Sebastian Siegel? And then I had that book, yeah.
Oh, that's cool. That's synchronicity.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's not,
Wow.
the circle is closed now.
All right, we talk again soon.
Yeah, I look forward
Thank
to
you
it.
so
Yeah,
much.
thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too.